On to the next section. Hello, life. 3 ways to stay dead. Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ, therefore it is no longer I who live. In many of these passages, I want you to note the tense of the verb that Paul is using to describe. Do you have to know that you were crucified? Paul says, I have been crucified, therefore it is no longer I who live. Have you ever taken a long international plane trip? Like to Asia? Man, I tell you, jet lag, right? Jet lag. Jet lag is your body not knowing what time you're in. Right? You don't know if you're coming or going. You get there and you've essentially either stayed up 24 hours or you slept when you were supposed to be awake and now you're trying to be awake when you're supposed to be sleeping. Your body is very confused because it hasn't caught up to the reality of the time you actually live in. You're disoriented, you're foggy-brained, you're in the wrong time zone. You have to get your time zone right spiritually. Paul is using verse after verse after verse to establish the time zone we live in. We live in the disorientation of jet lag, trying to get somewhere that we already are. And we can't live there because we haven't yet applied the past to our present, and we're all out of sync with what Paul is saying. You have to know what time zone you're in. You have to know when you died. You have to know how crucifixion works in your life now based on when it happened in the past. Colossians 2, verses 1 to 3. When your old man is buried and you're raised into newness of life, that's when you can start to know that sin has no dominion over you because you aren't under law but under grace. Colossians 2, 1 to 3. If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth, for you have died. That's a time zone question. That's a time zone reality. Paul's main argument here is related to time. You must accept the truth of what is finished on the cross and when. Part of staying dead. So number 1 is get your time zones right. Number 2 is bust up some concrete. See, we have mindsets that harden like concrete, and you must reset your mindset. Romans 8, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be filled in us, who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. Those who live according to the Spirit set their mind on the things of the Spirit. For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. For the mindset on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. If you're focused on the flesh, your mind is set on the wrong thing. You have to be participating with the Spirit, working with the Spirit, but the mindset is set in stone in many of us. It needs to be jackhammered out. When you have a mindset, it takes work to shift that mindset. It's like pouring concrete. Have you ever tried to bust up some concrete? It's hard work. It doesn't just happen overnight. Your new nature is a present reality whether you know it or not, but knowing it is a matter of shifting your mindset. What you put your mind upon, what you set your mind upon, is what hardens into your mindset. The mindset on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. It can't do internally when it's set on the flesh. But here's something I'm going to get into in a little bit. That's not just set on the flesh for your pleasure in the flesh. it can also be a mind set on the flesh by you trying to overcome your flesh. You're equally set on the flesh. And guess what? It can't work. Whether you're dead set on pursuing the pleasures of the flesh or dead set on resisting the pleasures of the flesh, either way, you're dead set on the flesh. Number 3, so 3 ways to stay dead. Get your time zone right. You have to know when this work of grace occurred inside you through the cross of Christ. Number 2, bust up your concrete hardened mindsets. Reset the way you think and set your mind on things of the Spirit, things above. Then believe and confess, number 3. With the heart one believes, with the mouth one confesses. Unless I learn the discipline of renewing my mind to the truth of what God has already achieved, I will remain spiritually stunted in the belief that I must achieve what Christ has already settled. I'll say that again. Unless I renew my mind to what God has already achieved, I will remain spiritually stunted in the belief that I must achieve what Christ has already settled. So I believe, but then I also confess. And I'm going to get to the power of confession tomorrow, but it's not enough for you just to lay hold of some of these things mentally. You actually have to train yourself. Part of how you develop new mindsets is to train yourself to confess the truth. Jesus said we're sanctified in the truth, but it's a matter of laying hold of it by faith and then speaking it, because James says your body will do what your mouth says. Your body, your tongue is like the rudder of the ship. You're going to follow what you're speaking into reality. That's not all name it, claim it, but some of that is right. You have to learn to confess the truth. You can't confess it without believing it, but if you believe it, it will lay dormant inside you apart from the confession.